Creative Babble.
Looking for the ultimate online casino experience? Step into the BetMGM Casino app, where every deal, spin, and goal brings Las Vegas excitement into the palm of your hand. Take your seat at Premium Blackjack Pro, where strategy meets top-tier gameplay. Drop in on the exciting Sugar Rush and Crazy Time slot games, or play the dazzling MGM Grand Emerald Nights, a slot experience that captures the magic of MGM. With so many games, it's time to make your move. Download the app and visit BetMGM Ontario today to experience the next level of gaming. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. 19 plus to wager. Ontario only. Please gamble responsibly. If you have questions or concerns about your gambling or someone close to you, please contact Connex Ontario at 1-866-531-2600 to speak to an advisor free of charge. BetMGM operates pursuant to an operating agreement with iGaming Ontario.
So, when I ask, what is Odoo? What comes to mind? Well, Odoo is a bit of everything. Odoo is a suite of business management software that some people say is like fertilizer because of the way it promotes growth. But some people also say Odoo is like a magic beanstalk because it grows with your company and is also magically affordable. But then again, you could look at Odoo in terms of how its individual software programs are a lot like building blocks. I mean, whatever your business needs. Manufacturing, accounting, HR programs, you can build a custom software suite that's perfect for your company. So, what is Odoo? Well, I guess Odoo is a bit of everything. Odoo is a fertilizer, magic beanstalk building blocks for business. Yeah, that's it. Which means that Odoo is exactly what every business needs. Learn more and sign up now at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
How old do you think you were when you found these crime scene photos?
Oh, I was young and he was mortified. I was probably like 8, maybe 7 or 8, somewhere around there.
You must have been mortified.
This is Dr. Tristin Engels. She's a licensed clinical forensic psychologist. She's a published author and the co-host of the podcast Killer Minds. She's also the granddaughter of Louis Vitolo, a former police sergeant with the Chicago PD. Dr. Engels told me that her love for forensic psychology started as a child, while exploring and playing in the den where her grandfather worked.
He had like a microscope and I'd take like leaves and things from the yard and we go look at it under the microscope together. He had like all kinds of gadgets. So I'd love to like explore his den. It felt like, Dick Tracy. He had like calculator watches and erasable pens and it just felt magical in his den. So I kind of stumbled upon some crime scene photos, in particular, Richard Speck.
It was a notorious chapter in Chicago history, the Richard Speck murders. 8 young nursing students massacred in their apartment.
It was one of the most brutal mass murders the city had ever seen. On a hot summer night in 1966, Richard Speck broke into a townhouse on the city's south side. Inside were 9 nursing students, all living together while training at a nearby hospital. Over the course of several terrifying hours, Speck held them hostage, binding them, torturing them, and ultimately killing 8 of the 9 women, one by one. The lone survivor managed to hide under the bed and lived to identify the suspect.
From the time of his arrest, Speck maintained he could remember nothing of the early morning hours of July 14th, 1966.
I was like, what is this?
Oh my God.
I don't know if you remember that case, but they were, tortured and cut and their necks were slit. And it was very gruesome photos. I remember he came in and he had seen me holding them and he went white as a sheet. Like he was like, oh my gosh, no, please give me those, out. He said, get out. And then he was like, he took some time, then he had to come sit down and talk to me and tell me like this person was bad. They did bad things. I helped put them behind bars. They are not out there anymore. They're not going to hurt anyone. And then from that point on, he had like cleared out his den of all the cool things and like would lock it.
But as Dr. Engels grew up, she began to notice the ways that her grandfather's gruesome work was making a difference and truly helping victims. Louis Vitolo didn't just work crime scenes, he helped shape how they were investigated. As a chief of the Chicago Crime Lab, he pioneered forensic techniques, wrote books on evidence collection, and is even credited with creating the very first rape kit. That caught the attention of Martha Goodard, a passionate victims advocate. She was alarmed by how chaotic and inconsistent the process was for handling sexual assault cases. There was no standard protocol, no clear way of collecting evidence, no system to protect the victims. So she set out to change that.
And he helped her in forming the very first evidence collection kit for sexual assault. It was named after him. She wanted to name it after him. It was very inspiring to me. I was very close to him, though, growing up. I was with him every weekend. And when he passed away, we got inundated with letters, calls, cards from people all around the world talking about how him and Martha's contribution has done so much for them and their family as survivors of sexual assault. And it really just inspired me even further to do more with my education. And so after he passed, I enrolled in grad school, and then I became a forensic psychologist to address recidivism, because one of the things that he talked about in his career was that no matter what he did, no matter how much he improved in crime scene investigation, he was often seeing the same people cycle through the system, and he didn't understand why they weren't deterred by crime and why they weren't deterred by all of the, advancements that they were making. And that's what I sought to address. And so that's why I went into my career.
In today's episode, I'm going to talk to Dr. Engels about the state of mind of some of the world's most famous monsters. I wanted to sit down with her to gain a better understanding of what forensic psychologists do, especially when they're the ones who determine if a defendant is considered criminally insane. I've always wondered, how easy would it be to pretend to be crazy just to avoid jail or prison? Most of you probably think you could do it, right? Fool the system? Well, in today's episode, we're going to find out how easy it is to fake insanity. I'm Javier Leiva, and this is Pretend. Stories about real people pretending to be someone else.
Missions to Mars, driverless cars, AI chatbots. Feels like we're already living in the future. Well, Robinhood is built for the future of trading. Robinhood's intuitive design makes trading seamless. Spot opportunities and take control of your trades with tools like screeners, simulated returns, and Strategy Builder. On Robinhood, traders have access to hundreds of popular stocks and ETFs, 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, so you can keep up with today's fast-paced markets. You can now even trade stocks and crypto all in one place with the new desktop platform, Robinhood Legend. The future of trading is fast, powerful, and precise. Experience it now on Robinhood. Investing is risky. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Trading during extended hours involves additional risks. Cryptocurrency services are offered through an account with Robinhood Crypto LLC, NMLS ID 1702840. Robinhood Crypto is licensed to engage in virtual currency business activity by the New York State Department of Financial Services.
So what is a forensic psychologist? I thought I knew the answer to this, but maybe I don't. I mean, is it the same thing as a FBI profiler?
I get that a lot too, just on a day-to-day basis. Or whenever people ask me what I do, they always immediately go to like Criminal Minds, or they assume that I go to crime scenes. I don't go to crime scenes. Usually when I get called in, and this is the case for most forensic psychologists, though of course there are some that might be at a crime scene for whatever reason. That's very rare. We're called in after the fact. We're called in after there's a suspect in custody. I have to see crime scene photos at times, especially if I'm called in to do an assessment for an insanity defense or, assess whether or not there's criminal responsibility, because I have to evaluate whether or not they knew at the time of the commission of the crime that they knew what was right from wrong during that moment. So I get crime scene photos, I'll get body-worn camera footage, I'll get transcripts, I'll get interrogation footage of their mental state. It depicts their mental state at the time that the crime was committed. But I don't go to the scene. I don't investigate crime scenes. Outside of that, I have nothing to do with that. Forensic psychologists are called in after the suspect is apprehended and they're in the pretrial stages.
And you play a critical role during trials, right? That's where...
Yeah, we'll get called in to assess and or testify.
We always hear how forensic psychologists and their roles in cases, but sometimes we don't hear about when things go wrong. The central question that inspired this episode was, can the criminal fool you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what are some of the limitations, I guess, as a forensic psychologist and as maybe even a FBI profiler, somebody who's looking at a case and the motives behind the crime?
I mean, that's a great question. And it's a great topic because it really isn't talked about a lot. So let's talk about psychological profiling in general in criminal investigations and what the limitations are. So profilers are usually FBI agents or law enforcement. They're not clinically trained, but they have investigative experience, and that allows them to help narrow down potential suspects and apprehend the right person. That's their goal. Generally, profilers have bachelor's degrees. They might have additional undergrad training and experience, but they are usually law enforcement or started in that capacity. They don't have clinical training like we do, and they can make clinical assumptions regarding the onset of certain conditions or symptoms of a condition, which is something that occurred with the case of the Mad Bomber.
The Mad Bomber. For 16 years, George Metesky terrorized New York City, planting homemade bombs in theaters, libraries, office buildings, and subway stations. From 1940 to 1956, panic spread as explosions shattered the calm of everyday life. But these weren't random acts of chaos. Metesky had a target, Con Edison, the power company that he believed ruined his life. After suffering an injury on the job and being denied compensation, he vowed revenge and made the entire city his battleground. Investigators were baffled. FBI profilers believed that they were hunting a reclusive blue-collar drifter, but the real Mad Bomber was hiding in plain sight. A former employee with a long memory and a deep grudge. The crucial mistake in the profile kept police off his trail for decades.
They made assumptions about the onset of when maybe they had psychosis. They can lack awareness regarding their own biases, and that can impair their objectivity. And this can cause egregious errors. And a great example, and I know we'll talk about some more, but a great example of how biases created errors in profiling to find a suspect is the case of Derek Todd Lee, which we actually covered on my podcast, Killer Minds.
Derek Todd Lee brutally murdered Charlotte Murray Pace in her townhome near LSU. It was that case that set off a terrifying 10 months in South Louisiana.
But the agents that profiled him got his race wrong, which delayed his capture as a result. Stereotypes can also be a limitation. Profiling relies heavily on subjective interpretations and lack of scientific validation, but the same can be said of some aspects of forensic psychology as well, because clinical opinions are partially subjective. Even if we're including clinical instruments and different sources of psychometric data to substantiate the opinion, the reality is that two forensic psychologists could have different findings with the same information, and this does actually happen frequently.
I can imagine. Just because it has the word science in the title doesn't mean that it is an absolute black and white thing, right?
Right.
There is subjectivity that comes with it. And in the case of Derek Todd Lee, just the fact that they got something such a big thing wrong would send them on a tangent that will be impossible to course correct. I mean, so much damage could be done while they figure out what to do, right? You identified even some of the flaws with forensic psychology, but do you think that criminals could game the system? That they know what you're trying to get out of them, and maybe they'll just tell you what you want to hear?
Absolutely. And that actually happens very frequently. I've even witnessed it myself. I've even fallen for it when I was less experienced and I didn't fully understand all the ways in which they could game the system to actually have that forethought and to be concerned about that or assess for that. It does happen.
While profilers look outward to predict who might commit a crime, forensic psychologists look inward to understand why someone did it.
So that's what our role is. And because we're called in as forensic psychologists in forensic settings, which are typically like criminal justice settings or incarcerated settings or detention facilities, those are a population of people that's pretty saturated who are very manipulative because that's just how they've navigated their lives. They use impression management to try and tell us that they're actually very mentally ill because they have something to gain. They're trying to manage the impression that they give us for a personal gain. Another term that's thrown around frequently that people may or may not recognize is malingering.
It basically means someone's faking mental illness, usually to get out of trouble. Maybe they want to avoid jail or prison and stall out their court case. Either way, they're putting on an act for personal gain.
And that happens very frequently. So if I get called in, let's say, to do competency to stand trial evaluation, so the judge says, hey, there's a declaration of doubt regarding their ability to rationally or factually understand what's going on in their criminal proceedings. We need to make sure this isn't due to a mental illness. And if it is, we need to be able to know if we need to treat that first to stabilize before we can proceed so that their due process isn't violated. So they have something to gain. If I come in to assess that, they can delay. They can spend more of their time in a psychiatric hospital. So like part of their time served is in a more cushy place for them. So a lot of times they'll feign psychiatric symptoms. They'll try to present or exaggerate symptoms to make it appear as if they're mentally ill for personal reasons. Or the opposite. They might try and pretend that they've got it all together and they really don't. That actually does happen as well.
I can imagine that if you're facing some serious charges, those are your two choices, right? You either try to seem as sane as possible, creating doubt that you couldn't possibly do this. I could imagine like a Ted Bundy or somebody that you're like, no, this guy can't possibly do that. Or you would lean in on it and try to fake a psychiatric episode or something to maybe aid their defense. And I'm just wondering, you even mentioned early on in your career that you kind of fell for some of these things too.
Yeah.
What would somebody who's trying to fake a mental illness, what do they do versus somebody who is mentally ill? Like, what are some of the signs?
So they tend to over-report symptoms in a way that isn't genuine, that what we would genuinely see. So when we have more experience working with severely mentally ill, you can tell what appears to be genuine versus what appears to be exaggerated. People who are genuinely mentally ill don't always have the insight into their mental illness. So the way that they're presenting and what they're saying are always congruent with each other. So that's something that really stands out when someone's genuinely psychiatrically ill versus somebody who is over-reporting and then it's inconsistent with what they're presenting as. They also report things that are not commonly reported in genuine psychiatric patients or is not statistically normal. So an example would be, let's say, I ask if they're hearing voices, right? Because that's a big one. People know that that's a buzzword. If I say I hear voices, then I'm psychotic. I have a psychotic disorder, and therefore that should grant me incompetent, or that should make me not criminally responsible. But Genuine psychiatric patients will report those voices in a way that is consistent with the literature, with the research, with what we've seen, whereas people who are exaggerating or feigning are going to report what that experience is like in a way that is very inconsistent with the literature, with the research, with the experiences that we've had and what we've seen.
And I can imagine that it's probably more consistent with what they've seen in a movie or what they imagine schizophrenia to be like, right?
Right.
Right. Because schizophrenia, I would imagine, comes in very different forms. And also there's a history of it. I know it could develop later in life. So I wonder.
Yeah, there's early onset. There's the more typical onset, and then there is late onset. But yeah, you're right. It's usually a gradual onset, and in some cases, it's an insidious onset. It really depends on a lot of different variables in the person's. It's subjective, right? So you have to take it on a case by case basis. But they look at what they've seen and heard in the movies, and they use that as their guide. And it's really easy for us over time, like as more experience, like I mentioned, if I was inexperienced and I didn't have as much exposure to severely mentally ill in different settings, and if I didn't understand what the common manipulation tactics are or what the gain is, that's easy for me to be able to misinterpret that or to fall for it. Because again, we're also trained, we need to be ethical. We need to make sure we're treating people. If we assume that people are faking without doing a thorough evaluation, and we have assessments that can help us identify if somebody is lying or guarded or feigning, if we assume that and then we don't treat it, then we're liable if something happens. So, there's a lot at stake as well. So as a new person who's inexperienced, we're more conservative and we err on the side of caution because of that fear that we can easily fall victim to the manipulation tactics.
And knowing that forensic psychology is not foolproof, it's not bulletproof, right? It's something that you are an expert witness in a trial. But my question is, how heavily weighted is your opinion on the outcome of sentencing or the outcome of the verdict?
So for example, the most common court-ordered assessment is competency. That's the number one. I get majority of the work I get is competency to stand trial. And then the second would be mental health diversion here in California. And then down the line is insanity, which is a legal term. We don't use sane or insane in clinical terms. It's a legal term. So the judges, the jurors, and the attorneys are not trained. They don't have the knowledge, skill, experience, or training to understand what the mental health condition is, if there's a mental health condition, and how that played a role in their ability to either understand their criminal proceedings or distinguish right from wrong, or if they really are a risk to the public, could they use treatment instead of prison? They're not trained to really assess for that. And so the courts have an obligation, both ethically and legally, to ensure that due process is being followed for each defendant. Because if they don't, there's a risk for mistrials, there's all sorts, and a risk to the public as well. So the courts do put a lot of emphasis on our opinion and on our expertise. And they do rely heavily on us in these specific cases to come to those decisions on a verdict. But it's not the end all be all. So we provide the assessment, we provide that report to the court if they decide that they want to stipulate or not, depending on what happens in beyond that, we might be called in to testify and to present our expertise to a jury if it goes to trial. And then the jury hears that. But the ultimate decision that's made is always left to the trier of fact, meaning always left to the courtroom to decide. We provide our opinion. We give our psychometric data, we give all the stats, the research, the literature, everything to back up that opinion. But the decision ultimately lies within the court. And one thing I will say is that, at least here in California, and I can't speak for other states because every state does everything differently, but here in California, whenever they appoint somebody to assess a defendant for, let's say, competency or insanity, they don't just appoint one psychologist, they'll appoint two. and 2 psychologists will do the evaluation. And if we both yield the same opinion, then that's done. Then the court has it, and then the prosecutor and the defense attorney will review and decide if they're going to stipulate or not on that and how to proceed going forward. Now, if I have an opinion and the other psychologist has a different opinion, then the judge will appoint a third tiebreaker opinion. And from that, they'll go off of that decision. And then again, typically, that usually results in us coming to testify after the fact to justify that, given that there were differences of opinion.
So there's multiple layers to ensure that we're making the right call.
Exactly.
And when we talk about faking mental illness, I would imagine that the general public probably assumes that, hey, I could fake a mental disease. I think this is a lot more common than we realize. But from your experience, how many people actually fake mental illness and actually avoid prison? Is it really a problem, or is this something that just the general public has wrong?
It's not. I mean, they do it often. They attempt to, but that doesn't get them out of,
they successfully
the consequence. Do it? Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot of, like you said, layers. There's a lot of checks and balances in place. And let's say, for example, we err on this side of conservativeness and we decide, you know what, we're not entirely sure here what's going on with this person. But to be fair for their due process and to be fair to ensure there's no mistrials, we're going to declare them incompetent so that what happens then is they'll go to a state hospital,
where they can be closely observed in a locked forensic setting. There's a team that can conduct a more in-depth psychological assessment and monitor how the person responds to treatment, including changes once they're on medication. It's a much more controlled environment designed to tease out what's real and what's being faked.
And usually from that point on, they're able to detect really quickly whether or not this person is truly incompetent or not. And if they find that they are, and they've been able to really really narrow down what we were having a hard time seeing, they'll bring them right back to court. They'll send in a report to the court and say restoration has been done. And this is done by a treatment team. It's not one person. That's another thing I think people don't consider, is that it's like supervisors, it's psychiatry, it's the treating providers, it's the competency educators, the psych techs. They all meet, they all talk about it, they all provide their own observations, their own input, and they all come to that decision together. There's no way that they would just restore somebody who is not at a state of restoration.
In other words, you could try to fool one person one day, but can you fool a team of people for multiple days and be consistent about it? And that's, like the whole concept of one flew over the cuckoo's nest, right?
Exactly, yeah.
After the break, I'm going to ask Dr. Engels about some of the most famous cases in history and hear her thoughts on the forensic psychology of the world's most notorious criminals.
Missions to Mars, driverless cars, AI chatbots. Feels like we're already living in the future. Well, Robinhood is built for the future of trading. Robinhood's intuitive design makes trading seamless. Spot opportunities and take control of your trades with tools like screeners, simulated returns, and Strategy Builder. On Robinhood, traders have access to hundreds of popular stocks and ETFs, 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, so you can keep up with today's fast-paced markets. You can now even trade stocks and crypto all in one place with the new desktop platform, Robinhood Legend. The future of trading is fast, powerful, and precise. Experience it now on Robinhood. Investing is risky. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Trading during extended hours involves additional risks. Cryptocurrency services are offered through an account with Robinhood Crypto LLC, NMLS ID 1702840. Robinhood Crypto is licensed to engage in virtual currency business activity by the New York State Department of Financial Services.
Danger lurks in the American landscape.
No one in their right mind would be out here, which makes it the perfect place to kill someone.
Introducing Hot and Deadly from ID, your podcast for classic American true crime served with a side of biscuits and gravy. On each episode, you'll hear some of ID's most shocking stories of murder and betrayal, from the mystery of a preacher shot and killed by a bow and arrow to a former prom queen gone missing and found murdered. Listen to Hot and Deadly on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
So let's get back to Ted Bundy, because he's, to me, the quintessential criminal who I think society had a really hard time accepting that he was capable of doing what he has done, right? And, you know, he's this charming guy, but he's also this serial killer who confessed to killing over 30 women.
Mm-hmm.
And because of his appearance and his demeanor, he was able to fool a lot of people in the law enforcement arena, where he was able to escape and reoffend
twice.
Twice.
He escaped twice. Like, once fool me, once, twice, shame, twice.
So what do you think is like the biggest lesson there when you're dealing with a potential Ted Bundy?
So for Ted Bundy, I think is somebody that really, like you said, it shocked a lot of people that he was capable of this. And it's because not just that he's charming, but he was educated, he was conventionally attractive, he was studying law, he worked in psychology. So because he was so high functioning, and not to mention he was a white male as well, that plays a role. Just, we know the halo effect in general. People see someone who's attractive, then obviously they make assumptions about how much they should trust them and their capabilities. This really, really played a role with Ted Bundy, especially during the times that he was active between 1974 and 1978. I think that's why he was so successful for so long. Now, with regard to escaping twice, there's a lot there to talk about too, because in a correctional setting, whether it's a jail or a prison, the employees there are used to a certain type of behavior and a certain type of population. And Ted was very different from what they were used to, because Ted knows how to charm people. Ted knows how to manipulate. Ted is probably he's very likable. And I've worked in correctional settings for a really long time. I worked in maximum security prison for 7 years. There's complacency that occurs with employees in those settings. And so I think because Ted probably didn't give them a hard time, they didn't pay him as much attention as they did to other incarcerated individuals. And so they overlooked all the warning signs with Ted. So I think that's how they were able to, or he was able to escape from jail specifically. But with regard to this other escape, that happened at the courthouse. He was given a room to prepare because he was representing himself.
The courts also have to navigate a minefield of ethical and legal responsibilities. There's also a constant concern about liability, about making sure no one's rights are violated in the process. That's why in some cases, a judge may allow a defendant to represent themselves in court. As long as the person is deemed competent and understands the risks, the court is legally obligated to consider their request, even if it seems risky.
If you're representing yourself, then you do get some allowances of, having this time to prepare, having extra time at the law library. All of that comes with it. So because of that, they underestimated the risk associated with that, and that's how he escaped.
So really, this is not a failure of forensic psychology. This is a failure of the system, right?
The system. And I think we'll find that that's more often the case.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. We're not here to point fingers at anybody.
We're not pointing fingers, right? But again, we all have systems that we're working in and working against and working for.
And we have blind spots.
Exactly. And if we're also wanting to protect ourselves and our liability, sometimes that can create those blind spots even more.
And these are people that fall outside of the norm. So it's already kind of complicated right out of the gate,
Right. So when you were asking me earlier about how much do people try to manipulate? Well, we're talking about a concentrated population, right? Because I'm in a forensic setting. That is vastly different than private practice clients I see who aren't in a forensic setting. They're coming to me not because they're being court ordered to, not because they have anything to gain other than getting better. So they're going to come more authentically. They're not seeking to manipulate necessarily, but this is a concentrated population where that exists. So it does happen a lot in that population. Yeah.
I bet. But let's talk about another serial killer that is widely known, Ed Kemper.
Ed Kemper was detained in a mental hospital from the age of 21 for the murder of his grandparents, but was later released on the advice of psychiatrists. Within 2 years, he had decapitated and mutilated 6 students as well as his mother and her best friend. He sometimes raped the corpses. In 1973, he gave himself up.
Tell me, what was the failure when it came to Ed Kemper and as it relates to forensic psychology?
I think a lot of people initially are going to zero in on the fact that he killed his grandparents and then was brought to Atascadero State Hospital. And I don't remember how old he was. I want to say he was like 16 at the time that this happened. So he's at a state psychiatric facility and he was there for several months, which is where he needed to be at that age after something like that. And I think, and then he was released, he was discharged back into the community and went on to then kill 10 other people. So I think a lot of people are zeroing in and saying the mental health providers didn't assess him appropriately. They discharged him, even though he was a risk to the public. And to an extent, yeah, that's correct. But from what I also understand is that there were psychiatrists that actually argued against his discharge that did tell the parole board, hey, he's a risk to the public. But they went ahead and paroled him out of Atascadero State Hospital anyway.
Hospitals can't just keep someone indefinitely, even if they believe the person is a danger. For ethical and civil rights reasons, there are strict limits on how long someone can be held. To extend that time, the hospital has to petition the courts again and again to justify continued commitment. If those legal steps aren't followed, or if a judge denies the request, the person has to be released, regardless of the potential risk.
I don't know exactly what that time frame was back in 1964, 1973. I'm assuming it's different than it is today. But again, there's all this red tape that we have to go around in order to ensure there's no risk to the public. So from what I understand, there was people on his treatment team that argued he shouldn't be released, but the parole board still went ahead and did that anyway. And it could have been because he's been there too long. He maxed out his commitment term. We need a bed space for somebody who's more acutely in need of it. Let's discharge him to outpatient and supervised release. And realistically, ethically, we always want to keep someone in the least restrictive environment necessary. So that could have been part of it too. It's just a systemic failure.
Exactly. It could be all of those things or some of those things. But at the end of the day, I mean, these people that made these decisions were outwitted, right? They are going against a very skilled manipulator. And a lot of us have come across people who are narcissists and personality traits, but these are master manipulators, right? They're a little out of their league.
Psychopathic, right? Yeah. And that's another thing too. If you're working in a locked forensic setting like that, and the goal is acute stabilization, because that's technically what those hospitals are intended for, right? And again, Atascadero is known to be a hospital for the quote criminally insane. They do take mostly court civil commitments, but the goal is to stabilize. So sometimes the bias of the treatment team comes in there too, where it's okay, we're seeing you're actually what are we treating anymore? You're doing well, you're programming, you're working, you're not getting into any trouble with anyone else, you're taking your medication, you're not harming yourself, you're eating, you're bathing, you're beyond, this is not the managed care level that is meant for you anymore. And so sometimes the idea of, wow, we did our job, great, this is the goal, we want them to do better and then leave, can override other things. But in the case of psychopaths, they often do present very stable because the psychopathy is an actual diagnosis. It's a series of traits, affective and interpersonal traits. They can present very stable because in comparison to somebody with a clinical condition like schizophrenia, they are arguably very stable. They bathe, they eat, they can take care of their basic needs. They're rational. They're, medication isn't going to do a whole lot because they're not having any like mood or psychosis. It's easy to say, yeah, you're no longer appropriate for this setting. But we overlook what they're capable of doing if they're not, locked in it,
And that was really, you put it really well, where it's not just a one thing. These are multiple things coming together to create, this personality type. Are some of these people, these outliers that we've just discussed today, Ed Kemper, Ted Bundy, can that type of person really be rehabilitated?
And I guess it depends on what you quantify as rehabilitated. Like, can they be cured of this? No, they can't. Can they stop harming other people? That's a myth that they all can't. I mean, Dennis Rader stopped for years and then he was caught. I mean, they're capable of stopping, but are they capable of being cured of this? No, they're not. But the reasons for stopping are because, they vary. They either found a replacement behavior or they're aging out. They're an aging offender and they simply can't, but they will remain a risk.
Dr. Engels, thank you so much. This was really fascinating.
Okay, good.
Yeah, like you said, we don't talk about this enough.
Yeah.
And we hear about, the role of forensic psychology, but it was really fascinating to go into your head for a little while and talk about this topic.
I'm glad. Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, I think you're going to love Dr. Tristin Engels' podcast called Killer Minds, Inside the Minds of Serial Killers and Murderers. It's part of Crime House from PAVE. I really like this show, and I think you will too, so go check it out. Today's episode was written and produced by me and Mackenzie Ames. It was edited by the talented Punit Shenoy with the Podcast Pundits. Next time on Pretend, we are going to dive into the world of Bachelor Nation. It's the story of Clayton Echard. After one season of ABC's The Bachelor was over, one of the stars of ABC's Bachelor got a little frisky with a woman, and then she claimed that she was pregnant with his twins. What followed was a nasty, nasty legal drama. That's next time on Pretend.
Creative Back.